Dark clouds gathered like bruises across the northern sky, shrouding the wall in a gloom that matched the solemn mood of the night's watch. Smoke still rose in thin plumes from the ravaged courtyard of Castle Black, where the bodies of fallen men, both brothers and traitors, were being prepared for burning. Fires crackled, their flames licking hungrily at splintered wood and shattered barricades. Only a handful of hours had passed since Roose Bolton's attempt to seize the fortress and wrest command from Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, an act of betrayal that left the Watch reeling from fresh wounds, heaped atop those inflicted by wildlings and the others. Near the eastern wall of the yard, Jon Snow knelt by a stretch of trampled snow, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his thoughts. At his side lay Ghost, stitched and bandaged by Maester Aemon's careful hand. The dire wolf still panted, muzzle flecked with dried blood, but was alive and alert. Periodically, Ghost raised his head, as though sniffing for threats in the cold air. Jon rested a tentative hand on the wolf's flank, careful not to aggravate the wound. "You'll be all right, boy," Jon murmured, though he was not certain whether he spoke to Ghost or himself. His own ribs ached fiercely where a Bolton soldier had kicked him, and his wrists were raw from the cords that had bound them hours ago. But the physical pains mattered little compared to the tumult roiling inside him. He could still see Roose Bolton's pale eyes, still hear that terrible whisper. "You could have been a king, or a bargaining chip for half the realm." Bolton had accused him of carrying Targaryen blood, the rightful heir of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, a claim that threatened to overturn everything Jon believed about himself. How could it be true? How could Eddard Stark have deceived him his entire life? And if it was all a lie, why had Bolton sworn he had proof? Jon closed his eyes, forcing the memory aside. He had more urgent tasks at hand: repairing Castle Black's defenses, tending the wounded, preparing for the next onslaught from Mance Rayder's wildling host, or worse, the others. Some distant part of him longed for Ned Stark's guiding presence. But his father, he still thought of Ned that way, remained far at Winterfell, oblivious to the horrors that had just taken place here. "Snow!" He looked up sharply. Qhorin Halfhand approached, limping slightly on a bandaged leg. The ranger's normally stoic face looked drawn, shadows etched beneath his eyes. Behind him followed a few black brothers tasked with collecting the bodies. In the uncertain light of approaching dusk, Qhorin's scar-riddled features appeared more severe than ever. "Qhorin," Jon said quietly, rising to his feet with effort. "How fare the others?" "Better than you might expect, given what we've endured," Qhorin replied, voice hoarse. "Lord Commander Mormont has forced Bolton's remaining loyalists to surrender. Most have been disarmed and locked in a storeroom. A few who claim they were coerced are being questioned. The rest who resisted, well, they're dead." Jon exhaled, fighting back a shiver that owed nothing to the cold. "And Bolton himself, his body?" Qhorin gestured to a spot near the ruined gates. "They laid him out with his men. I suppose they'll burn him too, though some want to drag him into the forest and let the crows feast." The ranger's lips thinned. "If you ask me, that might be too good for the likes of him." Jon stared at the churned snow. He had killed Roose Bolton in the midst of chaos, driven by rage and desperation. Now the enormity of it weighed on him. Bolton was a powerful lord, once sworn to House Stark. His death would not go unnoticed in the north. Sooner or later, word would reach Winterfell. Perhaps it already had, carried by fleeing Bolton men. "Lord Commander wants to see you," Qhorin added. "He's in the common hall, what's left of it, deciding what to do next." Jon nodded, then looked down at Ghost. He did not want to leave the direwolf's side. Ghost returned his gaze with wounded but steadfast eyes. "Stay," Jon whispered, giving the wolf a gentle pat. "I'll come back soon." With Qhorin's help, Jon walked through the courtyard, past scorched timbers and piled bodies. The men of the watch worked grimly in the gathering twilight. The gate stood damaged, half-broken planks hastily buttressed by a matrix of nailed beams and rubble. At the threshold of the common hall, for watchers kept guard with crossbows, they parted to let Jon and Qhorin enter. The hall within was dimly lit by torches and braziers that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The acrid smell of smoke and burned flesh lingered. A few tables had been pushed together to form a makeshift command table, where Jeor Mormont stood with a half-dozen senior brothers. His broad shoulders slumped slightly. Blood and sweat stained his surcoat. He leaned on the table with his good arm while a maester's bandage wrapped the other. "Mormont," Corin said, giving a curt bow. "I found him." Mormont's head jerked up. His eyes found Jon, and a spark of relief crossed his rugged features. "Snow," he said. "Thank you for coming." He gestured for Jon to approach. Around the table, the men parted to make space. Jon dipped his head in deference. "Lord Commander, what is our situation?" Mormont gestured to a rough map of Castle Black, scrawled in charcoal on parchment. "Shaky but salvageable. Bolton's men nearly gutted us from within. We lost close to 100 good men in that fight on top of all we lost defending the wall. Our food stores were set ablaze in one corner of the vaults, but not enough to starve us yet. Thank the gods. As for the gate, the timbers are cracked. Any serious assault and it might give." One of the officers, a rangy man called Thorin Sharp, spoke up, voice tight. "We can't hold off the wildlings again if they come in force. We barely repelled them before, and that was with the help of Bolton's men. Now half those men are dead or imprisoned." Mormont grunted. "I sent out scouts this morning. Mance's host has withdrawn for the moment, but it's not a retreat. They're circling, perhaps regrouping, or seeking a weaker spot along the wall. If Eastwatch by the Sea or the Shadow Tower falls, we're finished." Corin nodded grimly. "If they break through at Eastwatch, they can come around behind Castle Black." Jon stood quietly, absorbing the dire news. Their situation was even worse than he'd realized. "Is there any word from the south?" he asked, remembering that letters had been sent, pleading for aid. Mormont shrugged, a harsh bitterness in his voice. "No. No ravens from King's Landing or anywhere else. For all we know, they're ignoring us while they fight their cursed war." His eyes flicked over Jon's face. "But you've had quite a day. Corin told me how you were captured. I never got a chance to ask you. Bolton said anything about your father or his reasons for abducting you?" Jon shifted uneasily. He could not bring himself to repeat Bolton's entire revelation before these men. "He only said he wanted leverage," Jon mumbled, half-truthful. "He thought that by controlling me, he could force Lord Stark's compliance. Some advantage for House Bolton after the war." Mormont regarded him steadily, as though suspecting more to the story, but he did not push. "Well, you ended it. The man was a traitor. You have my thanks, though it's a bitter triumph." Jon swallowed, glimpsing the flicker of understanding in the Lord Commander's eyes. Perhaps Mormont guessed Bolton had threatened Jon with some deeper secret. But the old bear was wise enough to let it lie, at least for now. A hush fell. Men shifted on their feet, weary from battle and betrayal. At length Mormont spoke again, voice firming. "We can't mope here. The Watch stands on the brink of destruction, but we stand yet. We must keep watch on the wildlings, and if we can strengthen the gate or shore up the walls, we do so. If Mance attacks again, we must hold. Somehow, until or unless the realm sends help." Thorin Sharp grimaced. "If the realm sends help, they've enough trouble killing each other." "One thing at a time," said Mormont. He turned to Jon. "Snow, you'll be leading squads to clear out the lower levels. Ensure no more hidden pockets remain where Bolton's men might hide. We've locked up the main group, but there could be stragglers." "Yes, Lord Commander." Jon bowed his head. "After that, I want you to rest. You've lost too much blood already. Don't deny it, boy, I can see you're pale as a white. Corin, you're in charge of patrolling the outer walls. Everyone else, see me for assignments. We have to mend what we can." As the men dispersed, a gloom settled in Jon's heart. Castle Black was battered, and the dread of another wildling attack weighed heavily on every soul. Yet deep inside, another dread festered. The knowledge that something fundamental about himself had changed. Bolton's claim, the name Targaryen. Could it truly be so? He found himself almost wishing Mance Rayder would charge the gates again right this instant, so he would have no time to think. In Winterfell, weeks of heavy snow had turned the courtyard into a white desert, with high drifts piled against the walls. Lord Eddard Stark paced in the great hall, reading and rereading a newly arrived Raven's letter from Castle Black. The message bore Jeor Mormont's seal and was scribbled in an urgent, shaky hand. Lord Stark, treacherous news. Roose Bolton attempted to seize Castle Black from within. He is dead, slain by Jon Snow during the coup. Our losses are great. The wildlings remain poised to strike anew, and we are in dire need of men and supplies. If House Stark can spare any more forces, we beg you to send them. Otherwise, the wall may fall. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont. Ned's chest felt tight. He glanced up to see Catelyn approaching, drawn by the tension in his face. "Ned, what is it?" she asked, laying a hand gently on his arm. "It's from Mormont," Ned replied, voice low and grim. "Bolton betrayed the watch. He tried to take Castle Black for himself, but was killed by Jon, my son." That last phrase came out haltingly, as though the word bastard stuck in his throat. Yet after so many years, he'd grown used to calling Jon his son in most circumstances. The truth was more complicated. Catelyn's eyes widened, the lines of worry on her face deepening. "Roose Bolton is dead? Good gods." She let out a shaky breath. "He must have gone mad. Or perhaps he saw some chance to carve out power while the realm is in chaos. But Jon Snow, did they say how he?" Ned shook his head. "Little detail, only that Jon somehow slew Bolton. The bigger issue is Castle Black is nearly in ruins, and the wildlings are about to attack again. Mormont is pleading for more men." Catelyn's expression turned grave. "We can't possibly ignore that. If the wall falls, the entire north is at risk. But do we have any men to spare? We've already sent so many to Robb." Ned felt the crushing weight of duty. His voice rasped with concern. "I'll muster what we can from the older, half-retired garrisons. The men who remain behind to guard Winterfell are too few for a large deployment, but we might at least gather a few hundred." He paused, scanning the letter again. "Gods, Bolton." He had already marched 500 men to the wall at my request, ostensibly to help. Then he turned on the watch. "That means the Dreadfort stands leaderless. I do not know if his heir, Ramsay, is at large, or if the line of Bolton now falls to some cousin. Either way, it's a potential crisis. The Boltons have never been easy bannermen." She nodded. "A crisis indeed. If the Dreadfort's men splinter, we might face new rebellions. Or they might claim you orchestrated Bolton's death. The North is fragile after so many have ridden south to fight in Robb's war." Ned began pacing again. "I must send word to Robb. He needs to know about Bolton. He'll also need to decide if the Dreadfort is to be confiscated or offered to whichever Bolton remains loyal. The law might pass it to Ramsay Snow, Bolton's bastard, unless we intercept that. But that's a tangle for another day. Right now, the watch cannot stand alone." Catelyn watched him, sorrow in her eyes. "War tears us apart, Ned. We're drawn in so many directions, always short on men and resources. But you're right, we cannot let the wall fall." Ned paused, hand clenched on the pommel of the sword at his belt. "If we do not defend the north from wildlings, and from these others Mormont keeps warning about, then no one else will. The realm is too consumed with battles in the south." He set his jaw. "I will ride north with whatever force we can gather. I must see for myself how dire the situation is. It's time I speak with Jon face to face." At that, Catelyn's lips tightened, though she nodded. Her complicated feelings toward Jon had softened somewhat over the years, but the mention of him always brought a flicker of old hurt. Still, she placed her hand gently over Ned's. "Very well, if that is what must be done." Ned met her gaze, gratitude warming his chest. Then he turned to stride out of the hall. "I'll call the banners we have left. It may take days to muster them, especially in this snow, but we'll leave as soon as possible." In truth, Ned's urgency stemmed from more than the threat of wildlings. Bolton's mention of Jon's lineage. Did the watch know? How close had Bolton come to revealing that secret? If word of Jon's true parentage escaped Castle Black, the realm could shift on a pinhead. Tywin Lannister, Stannis Baratheon, even Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, each might react in dangerous ways. He found Maester Luwin in the library tower and began dictating ravens at once, summoning lesser lords, old knights, and any man who could still swing a sword or draw a bow. The gloom of war weighed heavily on Winterfell, but Ned pressed on, grim and determined. 2 nights later, Castle Black endured another assault. This time, the wildlings struck at midnight, aided by the faint glow of moonlight on the snow. Watchmen peering from atop the wall saw them coming. A wave of savage fighters with makeshift ladders and grappling hooks. Giants loomed behind, urging mammoths forward to test the battered gate. Drums echoed across the plain, a low thunder that made men's hearts pound. Jon Snow stood atop the wall once more, wind whipping his cloak. Below, he could see the flicker of torches bobbing as the wildling vanguard approached. The Watcher's horns sounded. 1 blast for rangers, 2 for wildlings. This time, no third blast, though the others might lurk somewhere unseen. "Archers draw," bellowed Qhorin. They had reorganized since Bolton's coup, stationing watchers at intervals to ensure no infiltration from within. But manning the top was difficult with so many casualties. Those who remained were exhausted, half-frozen, many nursing wounds. Yet they stood ready all the same. Jon exhaled, bracing an arrow against the bow he had scavenged after the last battle. Though he was no expert archer, he could at least contribute to the initial volley. Beside him, another black brother lit a fire arrow from a brazier, sending flickers of orange dancing across the ice. "Loose!" Qhorin cried. A cascade of arrows rained down, some trailing fire. Shouts echoed from below. Several wildlings fell, but more pressed on, screaming their war cries. Mammoths roared, shaking the night with their trumpeting. A giant brandished a huge club, smashing aside the charred remnants of old siege barriers. Men began hurling barrels of pitch and oil over the edge, igniting them mid-fall to create columns of flame. The air filled with smoke. The smell of burning hair and flesh mingled with the stench of fear. Below, the gate shuddered under renewed battering. Through swirling smoke, Jon saw the shape of a giant slamming a log against the already damaged timbers. Splinters flew. A few Bolton loyalists, those who had renounced their traitorous lord and pledged anew to the Watch, were in the tunnel, trying desperately to reinforce the gate with nails, beams, and anything they could. Jon silently prayed they could hold. He shifted his stance, unleashed another arrow. It went wide, lodging in the snow near a struggling figure. Gritting his teeth, Jon wished for Longclaw, the Valyrian steel sword that lay strapped at his side. Though a sword did little good at the top of a 700-foot wall of ice. He longed for action, for a direct blow, but all he could do was watch the carnage from above. "All casks now!" Qhorin shouted, voice muffled by the wind. Another wave of flaming casks tumbled over the edge. A whoosh of heat flared below, momentarily illuminating the battlefield. Jon glimpsed wildlings scattering, mammoths rearing in panic. Several broke from the main group, trampling their own ranks. But the assault continued. After what felt like an eternity, the giant with the log broke through the charred gate. A jagged hole opened, large enough for men to crawl through. Defenders inside the tunnel rushed forward, spears braced, setting them against the gap. Blood splashed on both sides as wildlings tried to wriggle in. Screams reverberated in the night. "Gates breached!" came a frantic cry from the courtyard. Jon couldn't see the speaker, but panic edged the voice. "They're coming through!" Jon's gut twisted. If the wildlings poured through that gap in force, the fortress would fall. He glanced around. Mormont wasn't here. He was in the courtyard, likely rallying men for a last stand. Qhorin was fully occupied directing archers. The entire top of the wall was chaos. Steeling himself, Jon turned to the nearest group of black brothers. "We have to go down. If they get inside, we lose everything." One older brother with a pocked face shook his head. "We can't all go. We must keep raining fire from above." Jon looked at him, mind racing. Then I'll go alone if I must. I can't watch them break in. He turned, hooking his bow onto a sling across his back. Before he could even find the nearest rope lift or stairs, Qhorin grabbed his arm. You can't go down there alone, Qhorin growled. At least take a squad. I'll hold the line up here as best I can. Jon nodded gratefully, relief coursing through him. Qhorin shouted at a few men to accompany Jon. They scrambled for the ancient wooden lift near the southwestern corner. With a creak and groan, it descended, swaying alarmingly in the wind. The descent felt agonizingly slow, the fortress yard looming closer, lit by fires below. When Jon and the small squad landed, they rushed into the yard, weaving past piles of broken siege equipment and corpses. The cacophony of battle rang from the gate tunnel. Ghost was not here. He was still in the maester's chamber, wounded. The thought of it pained Jon, but he pressed on. Near the mouth of the tunnel, they found bodies strewn everywhere. Black brothers, Bolton men, wildlings. The air reeked of blood and burning pitch. Flickering torches revealed shapes locked in a brutal melee at the half-shattered gate. A handful of watchers still tried to repel the wildlings who wormed their way inside. More wildlings outside were pushing forward, using dead mammoths as partial cover. Inside, quick! Jon barked to his companions. They formed a wedge, plunging into the tunnel. Half blinded by smoke, Jon raised Longclaw, the Valyrian steel reflecting the dancing orange flames. A wildling, face painted with ash, lunged at him. Jon parried, driving the man back. Another swung a cudgel. Jon ducked, slashing upward. His blade sliced deep, the man collapsing in a spray of blood. Behind him, men clashed in the Narrow. W-space, steel ringing on steel. The Watchers had the advantage in the bottleneck, but the gate's breach widened each time a giant or mammoth shoved. Timbers groaned, chunks of charred wood tumbling. A massive figure burst through a gap in the wall. One of the giants stooped low to fit. With a roar, it swept a club that smashed two black brothers against the tunnel's ceiling. Jon reeled back, shock pounding in his skull. The giant roared again, thrashing at the defenders. Swords won't do against that, someone screamed. We need fire. Jon glimpsed a barrel of pitch behind a half-collapsed barricade. He ducked a wildling's spear thrust, pivoted, and hacked the man down. Then he sprinted through the swirling chaos, seized a torch from the ground. Another brother tried to hold off the giant, only to be swatted aside. Jon jammed the torch into the barrel, igniting the pitch. Clear out, he roared, grabbing the barrel and heaving it toward the giant. The sizzling pitch spilled, turning the barrel into a rolling ball of flame. The giant bellowed as the fire engulfed its legs, flailing blindly. Jon and several watchers dove out of the way to avoid a sweep of the club. Fire took hold of the dried hair and fur garments the giant wore, devouring them greedily. Screeching in agony, the creature stumbled back, thrashing. The watchers seized the moment to drive a hail of spears and swords into its torso. At last, the giant collapsed in a smoking heap, blocking the breach with its immense bulk. The flames spread, licking at the tunnel's timbers. Jon coughed, eyes watering from the thick smoke. But the immediate threat of the giant was ended. The wildlings pressing behind it scattered, some trying to drag the massive body away from the gate, others fleeing from the inferno. Push them out, Jon shouted, leading the battered watchers forward. Step by step, they forced the wildlings back, hacking and stabbing with savage desperation. Eventually, the wildlings retreated outside, leaving the corpse-choked tunnel behind. The watchers slammed new timbers across the half-broken gate, effectively lodging the giant's body as a gory, fiery barricade. When the fighting died down, Jon fell to one knee, chest heaving. Smoke stung his throat. The watchers around him were similarly spent, their faces streaked with blood and soot. One coughed, hawking up black phlegm. Another cursed softly. Outside, the howling of wildlings grew fainter. Perhaps they realized the gate was still impassable, sealed by a giant's flaming corpse. Or maybe Mance Rayder had signaled a retreat. Whatever the cause, the assault ebbed. Torches withdrew into the night. The watchers dared not celebrate. Experience had taught them that a second wave could come any time. Jon forced himself to stand, ignoring the pain in his side. He peered around the tunnel at the ghastly sights. Twisted bodies, lumps of smoldering flesh. The stench was nearly unbearable. Despite all that, a ragged sense of relief welled in him. They had held somehow, but the cost was high. A moan rose from a crumpled shape near the wall. Jon picked his way over debris to find a young watch recruit named Cotter, pinned under a splintered beam. Blood trickled from his temple. Jon beckoned another man to help lift the beam, then eased Cotter free. The boy groaned. I can't feel my leg." Jon summoned a pair of watchers to carry him out to the courtyard, where Samwell Tarly and Maester Eamon had set up a makeshift infirmary. The next hour was a blur of triage, helping wounded men limp inside, stacking corpses away from the worst of the flames. Many watchers stared hollow-eyed at the giant's smoldering remains, a monstrous testament to the night's horrors. At dawn's first light, Jon emerged into the courtyard, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. A hush lay over the fortress, broken by occasional groans of the wounded. The wildlings had retreated again, leaving no sign of an imminent push. Some watchers believed Mance Rayder was probing for weak points or testing their resolve. Others thought the wildlings might be losing heart after so many casualties. Jon had no illusions. Mance's numbers were immense. He had only to keep chipping away until the wall collapsed under the weight of repeated assaults. And the others, they loomed as a terrifying unknown. The Watch had spotted them in the distance days before, but so far, they had not joined the wildlings' attacks. Maybe they were biding their time. The thought sent a chill through Jon deeper than the winter wind. He rubbed his tired eyes, longing for a moment's rest, when a shout from the ramparts drew his attention. "A rider approaches." Jon hurried up the stone steps to the partial walkway that had survived the fighting. Indeed, beyond the battered gates, a single figure on horseback trotted through the churned snow, carrying a white flag. No horde followed. Jon and the watchers exchanged baffled looks. "Open the gate, carefully," ordered Lord Commander Mormont, who'd arrived behind Jon, clutching a blood-stained bandage on his arm. "Let them in, but be ready." The watchers dragged aside enough rubble to admit one horse. The figure rode slowly through the smoldering debris, raising a gloved hand in peace. As he neared, Jon recognized the swirling pattern on his cloak, a swirl of red, black, and gold. Not a wildling banner, nor any northern sigil. The man wore battered armor and looked half-frozen, his face gaunt. "I come from King's Landing," he called in a hoarse voice, carrying an offer from the crown. Jon tensed. The crown? That meant Joffrey Baratheon and, in truth, Tywin Lannister. The watchers parted, some with swords at the ready, as Mormont stepped forward. "You have a name?" The rider dismounted stiffly, wincing as though from old wounds. "Ser Philip Hayford," he replied. "I bring a missive from Lord Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King." He reached into a pouch and produced a sealed letter. Mormont took it, eyeing the red wax with suspicion. "What does Tywin want with the Night's Watch?" Mormont growled. "He's ignored our calls for months." Ser Philip exhaled, steam drifting in the cold air. "My Lord Commander, the realm is in turmoil, but the King's Hand recognizes the threat of the wildlings. He offers a deal. The Crown will send men, 2,000 with provisions to support the defense of the wall. In return, the Watch must swear neutrality in the war. And any rumors of a Targaryen presence in the north must be reported at once." A hush fell. Jon stiffened. Targaryen presence in the north. So the rumor had reached King's Landing after all. Did that refer to Daenerys across the sea or something else? Someone else? His pulse quickened, heart pounding. He forced himself to remain still, face blank. Mormont's eyes darkened. "We are always neutral. That is part of our oath. As for Targaryens, you must have us confused with children's tales. We defend the realm from what's beyond the wall. Ser Knight." not metal in crowns. Sir Philip's expression flickered. Lord Tywin has cause to believe certain claimants might seek refuge in the north. If your order encounters any evidence of Targaryen supporters, you are to inform the crown on pain of treason. He swallowed. If you comply, the crown's men will march north. You won't fight alone. If you refuse, he trailed off, leaving the threat hanging. A bitter laugh escaped Mormont. We have wildlings on our doorstep and White Walkers beyond that. And Lord Tywin chooses now to threaten us? If the watch falls, his realm will be open to every horror. Surely he sees sense. Sir Philip lowered his gaze. I only convey the message, my lord. Lord Tywin suspects the rumor of some hidden Targaryen in these lands might be fueling northern rebellion. If the watch is truly neutral, then let it turn over any pretenders if found. Swords scraped in men's scabbards. The watchers bristled at the demands. Jon's skin crawled. The letter's reference to Targaryens confirmed that Tywin Lannister was indeed sniffing around for any sign of a living scion of Rhaegar. Did he suspect Eddard Stark's so-called bastard? Uncertainty knotted Jon's gut. Mormont broke the seal on the letter. He scanned it briefly, lips thinning. Then he glared at the knight. 2,000 men? That might help us hold the wall for a few months. But why should I trust that Tywin Lannister would keep his word after we provide information? The Night's Watch is not a tool of the Iron Throne. Sir Philip spread his hands. The realm has bled enough, my lord. The crown sees reason to unify on this. Even the Tyrells support the measure if it stops the wildlings from breaking south. I risked my life coming here alone as proof of goodwill. Let me speak plainly. If you accept, troops and supplies will depart from Harrenhal within the fortnight, heading north. If you refuse, well, the crown has other matters to attend to. Mormont let out a ragged breath. I must consult with my officers. He flicked his gaze at Jon. Meanwhile, you'll be given shelter. See that none harass this envoy, but watch him closely. Sir Philip bowed stiffly. Thank you. 2 watchers led him away. Mormont turned, thrusting the letter at Jon. Read this, then gather Corran, Thornsharp, and the others. We'll decide how to respond. Jon accepted the parchment with trembling fingers. The words inside were formal, stamped with the royal seal. The gist was what Sir Philip had said. The crown offered men and provisions in exchange for the Watch's cooperation and immediate reporting of any so-called Targaryen sightings or claimants. Polite language barely veiled the steel beneath. If the Watch refused, King's Landing would let Castle Black fall. His eyes lingered on the phrase, Targaryen presence in the north. Shoulders tight with dread. He thought again of Bolton's revelations, of what might happen if Tywin Lannister discovered the truth. The man had orchestrated the murder of Rhaegar's children during the sack of King's Landing. If Jon was truly Rhaegar's son, and Tywin found out, he would kill Jon as surely as day followed night, or use him, twist him into a puppet. The memory of 2 children butchered by Gregor Clegane haunted the realm. They had been Targaryens. Clutching the parchment, Jon strode after Mormont. The old bear had retreated into the half-ruined common hall. Half the roof beams were charred, letting in the gray light of morning. Corran and other officers soon joined them around a battered table. Torches sputtered in the cold. Mormont rapped his knuckles on the table. We have a choice, ally with the crown under these terms or stand alone. If we stand alone, we may well be overrun by wildlings or the others in weeks. If we accept, we may get the men and food we need. But we become beholden to Tywin Lannister's demands. And I suspect those demands might grow. Thornsharp scoffed. The crown's men are no guarantee. They could arrive late or in smaller numbers than promised. Or come under some Lannister banner, seizing the wall as Bolton tried to do. Corran scratched the scar on his chin. A risk either way, but the men are needed or we die. The question is, can we accept Tywin's price? He shifted his gaze to Jon, who had not yet spoken. What do you think, Snow? Jon's heart pounded. He forced himself to breathe. We have to weigh the Watch's survival, he began carefully, against the realm's politics. Our order is supposed to be neutral, but by offering to inform on Targaryens, we edge into political affairs. Suppose Daenerys Targaryen arrives from across the sea. The crown will expect us to fight or betray her, or any other Targaryen. That's not our purpose. Mormont nodded, lines of tension bracketing his mouth. Just so. But if we do not yield, we might not survive to keep our vows. A long silence followed. Each man there understood that the Watch's first priority was to guard the wall. The question was whether the Watch could remain intact without help. Eventually, Mormont spoke again, voice hard. I will not sign away our order's soul, but I will do what must be done to protect the realm. So be it, we accept their men if that is the only choice. But we do it under condition that we remain free from direct control. We will provide no political interference, nor shall we actively hunt Targaryens. If forced, we might share certain intelligence. But I'll not have the Watch act as Lannister hounds. You think Tywin Lannister will accept that half-measure? Corran asked. Mormont's eyes glittered. If we couch it in diplomatic words, perhaps. He needs the threat of wildlings contained. And if rumors are swirling that a Targaryen roams the north, he likely wants us as watchers. The watchers on the wall. How ironic. Jon said nothing, though inwardly he trembled. If the agreement was made, Tywin would expect any Targaryen sightings to be reported immediately. If Ned Stark's secret came out, if anyone discovered who Jon really was, Mormont might be bound by oath to deliver him to the crown. Or men loyal to the crown, stationed at Castle Black, might piece it together themselves. Jon imagined gold-cloaked soldiers rummaging through the fortress, questioning everything. The prospect was terrifying. The conversation turned to practicalities. How to word their acceptance, how to ensure the crown's men did not commandeer the Watch. Jon's head spun, exhaustion dulling his mind. But he forced himself to follow every detail, for his life might hinge on them. When the meeting concluded, Mormont asked Jon to remain behind. The others filed out, leaving Jon alone with the old bear in the half-burned hall. Soot drifted from the rafters. Mormont regarded him solemnly, his grizzled hair disheveled by the long night of fighting. I see the worry in your face, Mormont said. I do not doubt Bolton told you some vile secrets, and now Tywin Lannister's demands weigh on you. You can speak freely to me, lad. Jon wanted to confide everything, but fear choked him. Perhaps if he told Mormont the truth, the old bear would keep his secret, or perhaps duty would force him to reveal it. He was the Lord Commander sworn to the realm. If Tywin Lannister suspected that a living Targaryen was in the Watch's ranks, what would Mormont do? His mind flashed to the tragedy of Rhaegar's murdered children. Tywin took no chances with Targaryen heirs. Jon forced a shaky smile. Bolton claimed I was someone I'm not. He said my father was Rhaegar Targaryen. I don't believe it. Mormont studied him. Eddard Stark raised you all these years. I cannot say what secrets he holds. But let me warn you, Snow. If there is any truth to Bolton's words, be on your guard. The crown deals harshly with Targaryens. And if Tywin Lannister believes you or anyone else might threaten Joffrey's claim. He left the sentence unfinished. Jon swallowed, nodding stiffly. I understand. Mormont clasped his shoulder. Let's hope it never comes to that. The others and the wildlings are foes enough. He sighed deeply. Go. Get some rest if you can. We'll finalize our answer to Ser Philip by midday. Jon bowed and took his leave. Outside, the gray sky seemed to press down on the fortress, as though the entire world threatened to collapse. Scattered watchers picked through rubble, some praying that the wildlings truly had withdrawn, others prepared for another night of carnage. He found himself drifting to Maester Aemon's infirmary, a corner of the fortress where wounded men lay on pallets. Ghost lay there too, bandages wrapped around his flank. The direwolf's ears perked up when Jon entered, though he made no sound beyond a faint whine. Jon knelt and stroked Ghost's head. Easy, boy. We held the gate. Jon whispered, voice trembling with fatigue and unspoken dread. We might have new allies soon, if we can call them allies. He thought of the golden lion of Lannister, the cruelty beneath the crown's gilded edges. Gods help us. Ghost blinked, tail thumping faintly. Despite the pain, the wolf's eyes glowed with steadfast loyalty, giving Jon a sliver of comfort. He sank onto a stool, resting his aching head against the wall, hoping sleep would grant him some reprieve from the maelstrom swirling around him. But it would be short-lived if it came at all, for the next day's decisions could shape not only the night's watch, but Jon's own fragile fate. High above the frosted turrets of Winterfell, morning light painted the sky in pale gold. Ned Stark stood in the courtyard, watching men saddle horses and hitch supply wagons. A force of 300 had been assembled. Old garrison knights, men too young or too old for Robb's main army but still loyal to Winterfell, and a smattering of sworn swords from lesser houses, Serwyn, Tallheart, Flint. It was not enough to wage a war, but perhaps enough to reinforce the battered watch. Near Ned's side stood a stout older knight, Ser Roderick Castle's cousin, who had volunteered to lead part of the men. Ned had already donned traveling leathers beneath a heavy fur cloak, a sword belted at his waist. A hush of grim purpose lay over the courtyard, for all knew the road ahead might be perilous. With winter snows thickening, the journey to Castle Black would be slow, but the North's defense demanded it. Catelyn approached, auburn hair tucked under a hood. Her cheeks looked pinched from worry. "Everything is ready," she said softly. "Are you sure you must go in person? You fought so many battles, endured so much. Could you not send Ser Wyman or someone else to lead them?" Ned reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "I must see the state of the watch myself, and I need to speak with Jon. This matter with Bolton. It might have stirred secrets best left buried." He let out a breath that clouded the cold air. "I'll not stay away longer than I must, but I fear what I might find." She nodded, pain flickering in her eyes. "I understand. Just return safely, Ned. The North needs you." He embraced her, inhaling the faint smell of soap and the castle's smoky hearths. As always, parting from her filled him with a sense of dread. Too many times he had left for war or conflict, uncertain if he would come back. But duty called again. Then he turned, swinging onto his horse. The men behind him did likewise, forming a rough column. Winterfell's gates creaked open. With a final glance at Catelyn's tense face, Ned spurred his mount forward. They set off at a steady trot, hooves crunching in the snow. The winter air bit at Ned's exposed cheeks, but he focused on the road. The route to Castle Black wound through the lonely expanses of the north, up the King's Road that would eventually veer east. Drifts piled high against rocky outcroppings. Occasional flurries of snow swirled across their path, forcing them to slow. Some villages had been abandoned, with shutters nailed tight and no smoke rising from chimneys. Fear of wildling raids or rumored others kept small folk hidden or fled. As days passed, the column trudged on, forging through an unrelenting cold. Nights cursed, younger men shivered, and older ones complained of stiff joints. Yet Ned pressed them onward, mindful of the ravens that had warned of Castle Black's peril. Each time they camped, Ned worried over the possibility that Jon might have been killed or mortally wounded in Bolton's coup or the wildling attacks. The letter from Mormont said Jon survived, but danger lurked around every corner. Could Ned arrive only to find tragedy? The thought tormented him at night as he lay in a bedroll under the stars, the wind keening like a dirge. Between exhaustion and worry, Ned barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of Lyanna again, lying in a bed of blood and roses, tears on her cheeks as a sage. He whispered, "Promise me, Ned." He woke with his heart pounding, cursing the weight of that secret vow. If only there was some way to free Jon from the threat that name Targaryen carried. But the realm had never forgiven Rhaegar's line, and with Daenerys rumored to be raising dragons in the east, hatred for Targaryens might be reignited at any moment. He trudged on. The journey took nearly 2 weeks, slowed by incessant snow. At last, they approached the wall, glimpsing that colossal edifice of ice rearing against the sky. Ned's breath caught at the sight, as it always had, no matter how many times he came here. The wall stretched endlessly east to west, dwarfed only by the leaden clouds overhead. Even from a distance, Ned saw the scars of battle, drifting smoke, shattered structures, and a battered gate canted at an awkward angle. Castle Black itself looked half-ruined. Makeshift barricades ringed the courtyard. As Ned's column drew near, watchmen shouted from the ramparts. A horn blast echoed, the gates creaked open, and black-clad men waved them in. Snow whipped around them, the wind cutting like knives. Ned rode through a courtyard strewn with charred debris and half-buried corpses under sheets of ice. The stench was rancid. He dismounted, scanning for a familiar face. Footsteps crunched behind him, and he turned to see Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, swathed in a heavy cloak, a bandage visible on his forearm. The old bear's expression combined weariness and faint relief. "Lord Stark," Mormont greeted in a rasp. "You've come. I was starting to fear no one in the south was left to heed our calls." Ned clasped the older man's arm. "My apologies for the delay. We marched as swiftly as we could. I bring 300 men, supplies, and some healers, though it may not be enough." He glanced around, taking in the gloom of black brothers digging graves, the battered walls, the sorrow etched into every face. "Gods, you've been through hell. You don't know the half of it," Mormont muttered. Then he turned, gesturing Ned to follow. "We'd best talk inside. But first, you'll want to see your son." Ned's heartbeat quickened at that word, son. He nodded. "Yes, did he survive the last assault?" Mormont's mouth twitched in a semblance of a smile. "He did. Fought valiantly. He's been resting in the common hall, or what's left of it." Ned handed the reins of his horse to a nearby retainer and followed Mormont across the courtyard. Broken timbers and rubble forced them to pick their path carefully. Black brothers paused in their labors to watch, some with hollow eyes, others with faint hope. Ned felt their desperation keenly. The presence of new men might be a turning point, or it might only delay the inevitable. The common hall had partially collapsed, forcing a portion of the interior to be cordoned off. The wind whistled through cracks overhead. Men sat on benches, cleaning weapons or mending clothes. Smoke from a central fire drifted upward into the open sky where the roof had burned away. Amid them was Jon, leaning against a post, eyes closed. Ghost lay at his feet, chest wrapped in white bandages. Ned's breath caught. Jon was older, harder than he remembered, dressed in the black of the watch, face smudged with soot and lined with exhaustion. Yet he was undeniably Eddard Stark's child in appearance. The same dark hair, the same solemn brow. Or was he Rhaegar's child instead? The notion twisted Ned's stomach with guilt. Mormont cleared his throat. "Snow!" he called. Jon's eyes snapped open. He caught sight of Mormont, then Ned. A flash of surprise flitted across his face. Relief, fear, something that Ned couldn't name. Quickly, Jon pulled himself upright, wincing. "Father," he murmured, lips trembling at the word. Ned approached, ignoring the stares of nearby brothers. He reached out, resting a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I'm glad to see you alive, Jon." His voice was low. "I heard everything. About Bolton, the battles. I came as soon as I could." Jon swallowed. He glanced at Mormont, who tactfully moved away, giving them a semblance of privacy. Around them, the murmur of activity continued, but no one intruded. I'm sorry," Jon said softly. "Sorry that it came to this. Bolton tried to." He trailed off, eyes flicking downward. Ned nodded. "Mormont wrote that you had no choice but to kill him. Roose Bolton was a traitor. I bear you no blame, Jon." At that, Jon visibly sagged in relief. For a moment, father and son regarded each other in silence, the wind picking up overhead. Then Ned gently laid his other hand on Jon's cheek, as though checking for fever. "You're wounded. Bruises, mostly." Jon's gaze shifted to Ghost. "My dire wolf took the worst of it, but he's healing." Ned crouched, studying Ghost's bandaged flank. The wolf regarded him with amber eyes, letting out a soft huff. Ned remembered the day the pups were found in the snow, how ironically the albino runt had been given to Jon. "He'll be all right," Ned said quietly, more a prayer than a statement. Jon managed a small nod. He drew a breath, seeming to wrestle with unspoken questions. At last he blurted, "Father, I must speak with you privately. It's important." Ned's heart lurched. He could guess what weighed on Jon's mind. "Of course," he replied gently. "We'll find a quieter place." They moved to a corner of the hall where a partly standing wall offered some shelter from prying ears. Ghosts settled near them, watchful. Ned noticed Jon's posture, tense as a drawn bowstring. The boy, no, he was nearly a man grown, seemed poised on the edge of revelation. "Bolton said, he said I was Rhaegar Targaryen's son," Jon whispered, voice tight. "He claimed you hid my birth. Is it true?" Ned felt the world tilt. The secret he had carried for so long pressed on him like an avalanche. He had prepared for this moment in 100 nightmares, never certain how he would answer. The sound of Lyanna's dying plea echoed in his mind. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me." He glanced around, ensuring no one else stood within earshot. Then he closed his eyes briefly, summoning the courage that had deserted him all these years. "Jon," he began, voice trembling. "I never wanted you to learn it this way. Gods forgive me." The flicker in Jon's eyes spoke of heartbreak, betrayal, and desperate hope all at once. "So it's true." Ned drew a long breath. "Your mother was my sister, Lyanna Stark. She and Rhaegar Targaryen. They loved each other in defiance of Robert's war. You were born in secrecy at the Tower of Joy. Your mother made me swear to protect you. Robert Baratheon would have killed you had he known. He swore to end every Targaryen child. So I claimed you as my own bastard to keep you safe." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Jon's breath caught, eyes shining with tears. He trembled, torn between relief that he finally had an answer and the crushing magnitude of what that answer meant. "Mother was Lyanna," he breathed. "So you're my uncle." Ned closed his eyes. "But I have always loved you as a father, Jon. Never doubt that." A tear traced down his cheek, surprising him with its heat. "I would have carried this secret to my grave, but Bolton forced my hand. Now Tywin Lannister hunts rumors of a Targaryen in the north. If he learns you are that Targaryen, he will move against you." Jon's face paled. "I took the black. I swore my life to the Watch. Surely that's enough? The crown can't want me dead if I have no claim on the throne." Ned grimaced. "Political truths seldom care about vows, Jon. A living Targaryen with a stronger blood right than Joffrey. The Lannisters might see you as a threat, vow or not." Jon staggered back a step, leaning against the wall for support. His mind reeled with the implications. King Joffrey's precarious claim, Tywin's cold ruthlessness, Daenerys Targaryen across the sea. And here he was, a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, a vow that precluded any lordship, let alone a throne. But the realm's cutthroats would not see it that way. They would see only a Targaryen heir. Ghost nosed at Jon's leg, sensing his distress. Jon sank a hand into the direwolf's fur, as though grounding himself. "What do I do?" he whispered. Ned could only shake his head, pain etched into every line of his face. "I wish I had an easy answer, but there is none. I brought these men to help defend the wall. Maybe if we hold long enough, if the threat of the wildlings and the others looms large enough, the realm might set aside old vendettas." He sounded as if he barely believed his own words. Jon's chest tightened. "Tywin Lannister is sending soldiers. He demands we inform on any Targaryens. If Mormont signs that agreement and they discover what I am..." He trailed off, horror striking him. Could the Watch be compelled to hand him over? Could Mormont's oath to the crown conflict with the vow to protect all men? Ned's expression turned grim. "Then we must ensure they never learn the truth." He placed a firm hand on Jon's shoulder. "None of this changes who you are, Jon. You are still you, a man of the Night's Watch, a good man. Rhaegar's blood might flow in your veins, but you were raised a Stark with Stark values. That is what matters." Jon's throat constricted with emotion. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush him. The father he'd revered all his life was truly his uncle. The mother he'd never known was Ned's lost sister, and the name Targaryen hovered like a death sentence. Tears pricked at his eyes, but he forced them back. He was no child, and the Watch had no place for weeping. Through a raw whisper, Jon asked, "Did my mother, Lyanna, did she care for me?" Ned's gaze softened, moisture gathering in his own eyes. "She loved you fiercely, even in her final moments. All she wanted was to protect you from the fate that befell Rhaegar's other children." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "She would have been proud to see the man you've become." Jon closed his eyes, inhaling a ragged breath. Ghost pressed closer, offering warmth. When he opened his eyes again, the tears had not quite fallen, but lingered in the corners. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Ned nodded, laying a trembling hand against Jon's cheek. "Forgive me for the deception, for the hardship you endured as a bastard. I had no other choice." Jon let out a shaky breath. "I understand." He wanted to say more, but words failed him. Instead, he embraced Ned, a sudden and fierce hug that overcame both of them. Ned's arms tightened around him, father and son, or uncle and nephew. United by love stronger than blood alone, they parted after a moment, each feeling the weight of the unspoken. Ned glanced around, noticing a few watchers who might be curious, but none intruded. "We must be careful. If rumors spread, all is lost. For now, let's speak of it no more. We face an immediate threat from Mance Rayder and from these others." He managed a half-smile. "I brought you 300 men. Perhaps that will lighten your burdens a bit." Jon swallowed, recentering himself. "Yes, we need them. Mance's last assault nearly broke the gate. We've heard no word from the Shadow Tower or Eastwatch in days. They might be under siege too." "Then let's see what we can do," Ned said quietly, stepping back into the open hall. As they emerged from the corner, many watchers eyed the newcomers. Ned's men filing in, carrying crates of supplies. Some Black brothers showed palpable relief at the reinforcements. Others remained suspicious, remembering Bolton's false offer of aid. But Ned's presence as Lord Stark of Winterfell commanded respect. Men parted to let him pass. Mormont approached, carrying a piece of parchment. "Lord Stark, we must coordinate these new troops. Also, we have a matter to settle with King's Landing." He cast a sidelong glance at Jon, an unspoken question in his eyes. Perhaps he wondered if Ned and Jon had resolved any secrets. But the old bear said nothing of it. The day stretched into a storm of logistics. Men from Winterfell's column needed places to sleep, watch schedules needed adjusting, and scouting parties had to be arranged. Ned and Mormont clashed politely on some points. Mormont insisted that the Watch remain separate from the Stark forces, while Ned believed a unified command would be more efficient. In the end, they settled on partial integration. Ned's men would fight under the Watch's strategic direction, but keep their own officers. They all recognized that time was short if Mance Rayder returned in force. Meanwhile, Mormont informed Ned of the Crown's envoy and Tywin's offer. Ned reacted with predictable skepticism. "I know Tywin. He's cunning. Even if he sends men, he'll exact a high price." Mormont nodded. "We may not have the luxury of refusing." Ned skimmed the letter, frowning. "He wants to place a northern garrison loyal to the Crown at the Wall, likely to keep an eye on you as much as to fight wildlings. And the Targaryen claws." Ned's eyes flicked to Jon in the distance. This could be trouble. Mormont noticed his tension but only said, "Aye, it could, but as I told your son, if we do not accept the help, the Watch might fall. We can't hold indefinitely." Ned exhaled. "Then we must spin our acceptance with caution. Give Tywin as little as possible while still securing those troops and supplies. If we can survive the wildling assault, we'll deal with the rest later." They moved to a small side chamber, where they penned a carefully worded reply, agreeing to the Crown's assistance but emphasizing the Watch's neutrality and disclaiming any direct role in hunting Targaryen supporters. Mormont's signature and seal were appended, as was Lord Stark's endorsement, though Ned refused to sign any subservient language that might endanger the North. Tywin would likely seethe at the half-measures, but hopefully he would still send the promised men. By evening, an uneasy calm settled over Castle Black. Snow fell in soft flurries, covering bloodstains and scorch marks. Ned's men took shifts learning the fortress layout. Jon guided some of them through the courtyard, pointing out vantage points where the wildlings had assailed the gate, or explaining how they had used casks of pitch. The older knights from Winterfell nodded gravely, taking in the evidence of fierce fighting. "Have you seen wildlings up close?" asked one northern soldier, a grizzled veteran with a missing ear. Jon gave a grim nod. "Too many. They fight with desperation. Most are just people fleeing from what's beyond the wall. Others who raised the dead. We've glimpsed them. It's not a story. They're real." The soldier's expression shifted from curiosity to horror. He had heard the rumors, but hearing it from Jon's own lips made it all too real. "Gods preserve us," he muttered. Jon's eyes hardened. "We must rely on ourselves. The gods alone won't keep them out." He left the soldiers to their reconnaissance and made his way to the infirmary. Samwell Tarly was there, ladling soup to wounded watchers. Sam perked up when Jon entered. "Jon, did you see your father? Is everything all right?" Jon forced a nod. "He's here with reinforcements. It gives us a fighting chance." He tugged Sam aside, keeping his voice low. "You won't speak a word about my mother?" Sam's eyes widened, worry etched on his round face. "I wouldn't, Jon. Of course not. Did Lord Stark confirm Bolton's claim? Or—" Jon cut him off, not wanting to say more in such a public place. "We can talk privately another time. For now, keep your silence. My life may depend on it." Sam swallowed nervously and nodded. "Yes, of course." Jon gave his friend's shoulder a grateful squeeze, then went to check on Ghost. The direwolf looked better, though still weak. One of the maesters told Jon the wound was healing cleanly. Ghost wagged his tail faintly when Jon knelt to scratch behind his ears. "Rest?" Jon murmured, pressing his forehead to Ghost's muzzle. "I might need you on your feet soon, old friend." He left the infirmary to find the sky dimming to a deep blue outside. Torchlight glimmered around the courtyard. Men huddled near fires, watchful in the hush of dusk. The tension was palpable. Another assault could come at any moment, from either Mance Rayder or the others. Or perhaps Tywin's men would arrive and complicate matters further. As Jon paused by a half-repaired rampart, he spotted Ned pacing alone near the stables. Something in his posture suggested a heavy burden. Jon approached quietly, noticing the lines of exhaustion in Ned's face. "Father," Jon said softly. The word felt both comforting and strange, now that he knew the deeper truth. "You should rest." Ned turned, managing a weary smile. "If only I could. My mind keeps racing. I had to see for myself the vantage from here." He gestured at the battered gate in the distance. "I keep thinking about how we'll hold if Mance returns with giants. Or if the others come for us all." Jon stepped closer, pulling his cloak tight against the cold. "We'll hold as best we can. And if we can't, well, we'll fight until we can't. That's the vow I made." A flicker of pride crossed Ned's eyes. He set a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You've become a true man of the Watch. I only wish these trials were not so dire." His gaze moved to the walls, stained by so much conflict. "Listen, about your lineage. Should you ever doubt where you belong, remember that your vow to the Watch binds you. No king can take that from you, nor any father. If you wish to remain at the wall, I'll not stand in your way, Targaryen or Stark or both." Jon's throat constricted. He nodded. "I don't want a throne. I never have. I just want to do my duty." Ned's smile was sad but warm. "That is enough." They stood side by side in the gathering darkness, father and son united despite the secret that threatened to unmake them. Snow drifted from the sky in silent curtains, dusting the charred wood and fresh graves. Beyond the wall's icy ramparts, the north wind howled, as though heralding a storm yet to come. In that quiet moment, a sense of foreboding settled over Jon. Even with Ned Stark's reinforcements and the possibility of crown soldiers arriving, the threats were too vast. Mance Rayder's hoard, the others lurking in the shadows, Tywin Lannister's cunning. And over all loomed the name Targaryen, a whispered secret that could reshape the realm if revealed. Still, he drew comfort from the presence of the man he had called father all his life, and from the renewed bond they now shared. Whatever came next, Winter's fury, wildling savagery, White Walker terror, or the intrigues of the Iron Throne, they would face it together. Duty bound them, honor guided them, and love, strange and tangled though it might be, gave them the strength to stand against the gathering storm.